All right, Joe, keep on admitting people, but if you'd like to get started.
Okay, thanks so much, Susan. And thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar. First, a couple of quick housekeeping items. As Susan mentioned, we do ask you to mute your microphones. And as you just saw, this recording session, today's session will be recorded, and we will make the PowerPoint available to you as well. A couple of the quick things. We want to encourage questions, but we also want to get to the content. So we've reserved 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So, please write your questions in the chat, and then we will get to them towards the end. Well, we do want to thank, Connect wants to thank our sponsors, Sentry and the Port of Long Beach. My name is Joe Devine, and I am the president and the owner of Axiotrope. We're a cybersecurity engineering firm, and we focus on the trade and transportation and the defense industries. I also chair the Connect Cybersecurity Committee, and this is the first of several informational webinars we're planning to help raise awareness within Connect, with the Connect members around cybersecurity. Today, we're going to review one of the most prevalent cybersecurity attack methods, ransomware. We'll also review some top attack methods, how to respond if you're attacked, and some ways to minimize the effects if you are attacked. We're also going to cover the question that's most asked about ransomware: should I pay or not? Finally, we'll review some things you should know about cybersecurity insurance. So joining me today is a national speaker on these topics, Linn Freedman, and a friend who I've known for a long time. Linn Freedman is a partner with Robinson & Cole, specializing in data privacy and security law, complex litigation, and artificial intelligence. She chairs their data privacy, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence national practice. Linn has been involved in countless cybersecurity incidents, including ransomware attacks. She's a former regulator with the Rhode Island Attorney General's office, and she's also shared her expertise as an adjunct professor at Roger Williams University School of Law and Brown University. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much, Linn.
My pleasure.
So let's get started. Linn, we can hardly go a day or two without hearing about another ransomware attack. What are some of the top methods of attack for threat actors to gain access to an organization's networks and systems?
Sure. You can advance the slide. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you. Ransomware has been around a long time, and unfortunately, the attacks have gotten more frequent and more sophisticated. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about some of the methods that they're using to get into systems, and hopefully some tips for you to prevent and prevail when it happens to you. But right now, and this is studies are done on ransomware, believe it or not, you can actually look this up. But right now, stolen credentials, ransomware, and phishing are the top list of attacks and methods to get into a system. Ransomware is one piece of that. It's in the top 3. It continues to be a problem and should be a focus of companies. But frankly, you hear a lot about phishing and smishing and crishing and vishing and all the ways that threat actors can get in. But I will tell you that there's also zero-day vulnerabilities. But from my experience, and I think the statistics would bear out, that your people are your number one risk. You need to continue to have your IT professionals be doing everything on the other end. But your people are the ones that are causing these incidents more than anything else. And that's because they're giving up their credentials, they're clicking on links, and we're seeing that threat actors are using different methods to get in. You can go to the next slide, please. So what's interesting is, and what does it mean that your employees are giving up their credentials? There's different ways that threat actors can get into your system. But if they get your employees' credentials, that means that they can They have a direct access into your system. And if they are able to get into that individual's email account, everything in your system and your network that is accessible to that employee is now accessible to the threat actor. So 74% of all breaches include the human element, which it gets down to your employees. And 83%, vast majority of threat actors are external, and their motivation is financial. Now, a scary statistic on this is if your employee gives up their credentials, which can be done through phishing, through an SMS text with a malicious link, with phishing, QR codes now have malicious links that will allow threat actors to get access to the system, or to, I have one right now, I have to tell you about it, because we all have to be thinking about QR codes differently than ever before. Technology, and your employees don't understand technology. Any piece of technology, no matter if it's an SMS text or an email or a QR code, can be embedded with malicious code. And the way that's happening, I have one right now where an employee got a QR code in an email, scanned or clicked on the QR code. It took that employee to a fake website that they thought it was a payroll website. It was a fake website. And once that individual got to that, what they thought was a legitimate website, the first thing they asked to get into the secure portal is your credentials. So we need to get our employees to be thinking about technology differently, and to understand that no matter what the next piece of technology is, it's now QR codes, there's going to be another one, that they need to understand that there's always a risk for malicious code to be embedded in that technology. And usually that has to do with stealing credentials. And then once they're in, they have the ability to access whatever that employee has access to. The other thing is, the shocking statistic is that once there's stolen credentials, that threat actor, the average time for a threat actor to be in your system is between 200 and 270 days. So when you think about all of the data that is accessible to the threat actor during that time, it's a lot of data. And in many instances, especially with ransomware, which we're going to talk about, especially with ransomware, once they're in, they have access to the data, they stage the data. That means they collect the data that they want. That's the most valuable data. And then they exfiltrate the data, and then they they deploy the malware, the ransomware, to encrypt all your data. So the fact that they're in there so long is primarily because of stolen credentials. Until that person knows that they're in there, or they change their password, they can continue to stay in there. Next slide. So most threat actors right now are organized criminal gangs, and particularly ransomware groups are organized crime. And I'll tell you a crazy story. So I had a ransomware attack for a company, and the company decided to negotiate with the threat actor, and we hired a negotiator. We'll talk about this in a minute. We hired a negotiator, and we offered a little money to get the data back, but more importantly, because they had exfiltrated data and were threatening to publish it on a publicly available website. So we offered a little money, and this was Phobos, was the name of the ransomware group, which has been pretty devastating in the last year. And the negotiator sent a message. And by the way, don't ever negotiate by yourselves. You're not qualified. These are criminal organized gangs. Don't ever try to negotiate directly with them. But so my negotiator sent a message to, and usually they're, in Russia or China, sent a message offering a little money. We didn't hear back for 2 days. That was the first time that ever happened to me. What are they doing? They didn't respond for 2 days and were offering a little money. We got the message back, and the message was, dude, period. Super busy, period. I don't have authority. I need to go to my manager. And that was a response from the organized criminal gang in a foreign country. They knew the slang, they knew what to say. They were so busy they couldn't respond, and he didn't have authority to negotiate. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And although the Verizon report says that nation state and state affiliated actors did not escalate as much, they are still Russia and China more prominently than Russia, Iran, North Korea. These cyber adversaries, they are a real problem. They haven't escalated, but they're still a real problem. So obviously the motivations are financial and espionage, threat actor affiliations or organized crime, end users, and then nation states. One thing that I think is really important for everybody to understand in the context of ransomware is, they're trying to find any way they can to get into your system, and they are preparing dossiers on all companies. What we've seen in 2023, and I believe will continue, is social engineering is dramatically on the rise. And what is social engineering? These criminal organizations spend 8 hours a day finding out who your employees are, finding out who they're connected to on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram, and figuring out how to develop a plan to use the familiarity of a coworker to dupe someone into clicking on something. So pretexting is just trying to start a conversation, impersonating someone. You can go out and get an IP address that is one letter off so that it looks like it's your coworker. They're getting a lot of this information on social media sites. They're looking at social media sites, they're connecting the dots, and then they're developing their plan. So the other thing to be thinking about to prevent ransomware, to prevent social engineering, to prevent a threat actor getting into your system is making sure that your employees understand that they are being targeted, they are being watched, they are being monitored by threat actors. Threat actors are using them. And many employees say to me, Lynn, I'm just doing my job. Like, what do they care what I'm, putting on Meta or Facebook? Well, the threat actors are using that, and in your security training of your employees, social engineering and what they're doing online is a really important piece of that. I just talked about it, yeah. So ransomware is still king, which is why we're talking about it. 24% of all breaches in 2023 involved ransomware. I will tell you that from my experience, and I do all sorts of security incidents, ransomware is the most devastating and chaotic to a company when it happens to you. Even if you think you're ready, you're never as ready as you think you are. It's chaotic, and it's very hard to recover, which is why we're having this conversation. The attack vectors, as we talked about before, email, desktop sharing software, web applications, direct installs, and backdoor. But phishing, even though everybody trains on it, even though everybody thinks that they can spot a good phishing email, it's still the #1 way that they're deploying malware and ransomware.
Yeah, I was going to, I know you put some numbers together on transportation industry in particular here. So thanks for putting this slide together.
Yeah, so the transportation industry is not immune from this rampant problem that we have. And PwC came out with a recent report kind of ranking what services were targeted and they reported. Now, this is reported. There are many instances where ransomware is not reported. But 13%, and you might not think that's a lot, that's the fourth highest sector in the United States that's being targeted. So, and I anticipate that that will rise for many reasons. Other industries are really upping their game when it comes to cybersecurity and security measures that they're putting in place. Transportation is it's a diverse industry. It's also a dispersed industry. And I think that you might be fourth in the last year, but I think those statistics are going to go up. And an obvious point is these guys are going to attack small or mid-sized companies because of the lower level of security and a lower likelihood of drawing national attention. When Maersk was hit, we all knew about it. The whole world knew when Maersk was hit, right? You can get a lot from a small to mid-sized company that's part of the supply chain. You can make money, you can make it worth your while. And in many instances, the threat actors are going for the low-hanging fruit because they know that smaller mid-sized companies are not investing in, as much in the more sophisticated security measures that big organizations. So it's easier, and they're a little lazy. So it's easier to get into a smaller mid-sized company.
Just a list of some of the recent attacks.
That was fast.
You mentioned a lot of times these bad actors target small businesses, and we think it's obvious to us, but it's not to the average, small business. A lot of folks think I'm too small to get anybody's attention. Nobody's going to want to focus on us. We're only a 10, 20, $50 million business. They're going after the Maersks of the world, but that's actually, not the case.
You're absolutely right. I mean, hitting the chance of hitting Maersk or, a large Kia Motors, right, is they have to be sophisticated. So the other threat actors, and there's many of them, are going for the quick hits. And so every organization in this industry is definitely a threat and is on some threat actors' radar. And so one of the important things, I think, is to understand that you're on radar, get your head out of the sand and try to prepare for it, because literally, I can't tell you how many times I get the call and the first thing they say is, I just can't believe they went after us. Well, they're going after everyone because everyone is a target. And if you're an easy target, you're going to get hit before the bigger targets. So really thinking about it in a different way and preparing for it is a big part of your resilience in this.
So Lynn, hopefully these companies are being proactive and they're putting in place some of these things, but whether they're proactive or not, at some point it's extremely likely that something happens and people walk into their business in the morning, they log on, nobody can access their systems. Now let's talk about what should happen if this is the unfortunate case.
So hopefully when you're hit with ransomware, you've already prepared. I would bet that there are many of you on this call that haven't really prepared for it. So there's a couple of things that I think are really important to think about in preparation, and then we can talk about what you do in response. But to prepare, the first thing is to have an incident response plan. And I'm not talking about necessarily hiring someone to do a 60-page plan for you. I'm talking about do you have a basic plan of what am I going to do if tomorrow or today, one of my employees or I hit on a link where a ransomware is deployed? Who am I going to call? What am I going to do? How am I going to recover? So understanding that before it happens is critical to the how fast you're going to recover from the event. So let's just assume that you don't have any of that in place. So the first thing on what do you do in incident response? I have on this slide, deploy your incident response team. Do you all have an incident response team? Do you know who's on your incident response team? Do you know how to contact them? Because you can't get into your contacts because you can't get into your system. Do you have their names and their cell phone numbers in your phone? Do you have them in a place where you can access them because you can't get into your work system on your phone? Do you know how to deploy? Are you going to deploy them on site? Are you going to deploy them on a Zoom? Do you have a Zoom account that you can get everybody together? How do you even deploy your incident response team? So the first thing is, do you know who your incident response team is? Can you contact them? And how do you get them together? Those are the questions. Obviously, there has to be a communication method. Many companies have a separate communication for emergencies, and some companies use their emergency communications that they would use for, weather or closings or things like that. You have to figure out how you'll communicate. One thing, and I'm not, this isn't a self-serving comment, but one thing that's very important in incident response is to make sure that people are thinking about what they're saying over email or text, because all of that is potentially discoverable if down the road you get sued, which we'll talk about. So keeping communication tight, making sure that people understand to be careful, and getting your attorney involved quickly is important. One of the most important things in response is determining how do we get back up and running? What is the business criticality? Some systems are more important than others to get back up and running. Go ahead, Joe.
I'd say hopefully you've already thought about a lot of that, beforehand. So, your IT teams and your cyber response teams already know, hey, the first thing we're getting up is maybe our critical customer communications, depending, of course, on your business. Another person that's typically on this incident response team is your CFO. Who's the person that is responsible for making sure that cash is available, or I should say cash, but finances are available, because you're going to be spending a lot of money really quickly, and you're going to, the sooner you want to sooner you can get access to your financial resources, the better, and being able to get those forensics teams going to make sure they can try to figure out the extent of the damage. The pieces that they can isolate from the attack. There are items that can be recovered right away or not, and that all takes money. So it's important to get them on board. Just to reemphasize what Lynn said, it's not self-serving. It's important to get all the communications from the beginning, client attorney privilege as possible, so that they don't have to be shared during discovery as much as you can. So, we typically would have an attorney right from the beginning as well, so we can cover this all with the cloak of client attorney privilege, because your attack that you're suffering, that's taking your business down, is affecting other people, and if it affects them monetarily, they're going to come after you.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about who else you might consider putting on your incident response team. CFO, another, someone from the C-suite, not only for money, but for decision making, because this cannot be an iterative process or a slow process when it comes to decision making. So you need an executive there who can make fast, quick decisions. Because if you're down and you can't communicate with your customers, you can't communicate with your employees, you can't communicate with your supply chain, or your vendors. I mean, you're down. You can't do any work. I don't know how we used to work without computers. We did it at one point, but we don't anymore. You're down. You can't operate as normal. You need someone from the C-suite there that can make decisions rapidly. CFO, really important to have someone from marketing, communications, someone who can assist with communicating with your customers, with your partners, your vendors, your employees. Communications is really important. CFO, legal, and obviously IT. Your IT professionals, whether they're inside or they're contracted outside, they need to be involved, because they're the ones that are going to be helping you figure out, can we migrate to our backup? Can we, what are the most important systems? How fast? How do we determine that there's no persistence of the malware? They're also going to be the key to the communication with your lawyer. Basically what happens is legal is going to take the lead. Legal, when I get the call, I get the incident response team together, and then we determine, do we need forensics? In most instances, I will say yes. I'll bring in an outside forensic vendor that can help mitigate, figure out where patient one is, how did they get in, and then start migrating, making sure the migrations to the backups are clean, getting the business going, but then on the other end, figuring out who's the ransomware attacker, what is the ransom, what are they asking for, do they have our data? All of those questions, you need a forensic firm to do that. So basically, from my perspective, I'm quarterbacking, getting the business back up and running with local IT and with forensics, migrating to the backups, making sure it's clean, the business is trying to get back up and running, at the same time talking to the incident response team about what's the ransom, do they have our data, what data do they have, because we'll talk about that when we talk about to pay or not to pay. The people that you need to be coordinating with is your insurance broker if you have cyber liability insurance, legal, forensic, a negotiator. I hire the negotiator. So all of that is under attorney work product. And the goal is to keep it protected from discovery, although it's not a guarantee. And then obviously you've got to have communication. So sometimes if it's a really devastating attack, we'll bring in outside crisis communications that specialize in ransomware attacks.
Yeah, so this type of a morning is not the kind of morning anybody wants to have to be going through. And, we've talked about the importance of having an incident response plan, making sure you've identified who's on the team, but it's really critical not to just have that plan put it on a bookshelf somewhere. It's, doing a tabletop exercise every so often. And depending on what is every so often, at least once a year, you want to spend some time thinking about this. Depending on your likelihood of getting attacked, you might want to do something a little more often, but at least run a morning, a 4-hour tabletop exercise and just kind of simulate, what does this feel like us going through? And you don't have to shut your whole company down, but bring your incident response team together and go through the conversation and the expectations that everybody's going to have on each other. So like any team sport business is, you can count on the other folks in the room to kind of go get their pieces done for you. And what you have to do. Yeah.
And if you haven't, so what is a tabletop? I do a lot of tabletops, and this is basically what it is. And I've never been in a scenario where the company didn't come out of a ransomware tabletop, start with a ransomware tabletop. And and you will see how many more questions you have than answers and how you're going to respond to this. I cannot emphasize enough how chaotic and devastating a ransomware attack is on your company. So practicing, that's what a tabletop is. A tabletop is getting your incident response team together with or without a facilitator and practice a scenario. Don't prepare for it. So it shouldn't be shared with everybody. These are my 2 cents, y'all. From my experience, I think they're more effective when the people in the room have no clue what the scenario is. And you say, this is what happened this morning. What do you do? Get your team together and figure out whose role is what. What do we do? How do we communicate? Who do we call? What is our timing for our backup? Do you know that right now? Do you know how long it's going to take you to get your backup up and running? Have you tested that? I mean, I've been in scenarios where they're like, it'll take us 24 hours to migrate to our backup, and it took 2 weeks. Have you tested that? These are the kinds of preparations that are really important, but can be discussed and determined, during a tabletop. You'll be shocked when all of a sudden, customers are calling. Do you have a call center? What are the call center people saying? Customers are going on your website and your website's down. How do you get your website up? Do you host your website internally, or do you have a web hosting company? What is the communication? Like, think about all the critical things you do every day just to work that day. And if it all was down, who would be responsible for getting things back up, and what is the priority? And that is really, if you haven't done that, that is the best way to prepare. And I'll tell you that, once or twice a year is a good cadence. But those companies that do prepare and do tabletops know who their incident response team is, know who to call, know who their forensic team is, know who their lawyer is. All of that, they're going to, and they do recover faster than companies that are just like, we have no idea. So be thinking about that. Q1 2024. Test your incident response team, test your incident response plan on a ransomware attack.
Yeah, having these backups is so important to recovering. When you're sitting in that room, the most important question is, how quick can we start servicing our customers again? And if you've done backups better, then you're going to have a better chance of being able to get to that data. If you have been doing your backups but haven't been testing, then how do you know if you're really going to be able to get that information back? So it's critical having good backups in case to recovering if you've been attacked. And of course, there's no way to guarantee protection against an attack. But if you have a well-planned system security system, that's a great place to start. If you look at the CT PAT minimum security criteria, they include very nice baseline controls that can get you started. These cyber bad actors are no different than any other criminals. If they see resistance when they start, poking around the edges of your organization, they're going to move on to a weaker target. Just like if you're a criminal walking down the street and, somebody has a dog and an alarm system, they're going to go to the house that doesn't have all that, right? So don't be that weaker target.
That last point, the apply air gapping, it's very, very important that your backup is not connected to your primary network, because the way some ransomware variants work is they get into your network and then they just start encrypting everything. It's like a spider or an octopus, right? And if your backups are connected to the network, that's just going to be another thing that they encrypt. And I had that situation last summer where where a company was hit with ransomware and their backup was not separated. They could not migrate to their backup. So then the encryption, the ransom and to pay or not to pay becomes a no-brainer, right? Because if you can't migrate to your backup, and you have no access to your data, and in some circumstances, they destroy your data, they destroy your servers. I've had that happen as well. If you don't have that backup, your only option, except for closing your doors, is to negotiate with the ransomware group, potentially pay a ransom and get your data back. Because I've seen situations where they've destroyed data, they've destroyed servers, and the only way you can get anything back is if you pay the ransom. So let's talk about that. Let the record reflect that I'm talking about my experience here. No one is in favor of paying criminal organizations, organized crime. The FBI is very clear that that they do not encourage any companies to pay a ransom. This is organized crime. This is a criminal enterprise. As long as we pay ransoms, ransomware is going to be with us forever. So you can go to the next slide. So, but when you're in the situation, this is what the reality is, and in more instances than you think, companies are paying. So the consideration when you are a board of an organization or you're senior executives of an organization to pay or not to pay is really all about what are the facts of that scenario. There is no one bright line around yes pay or no pay. What I will say is that every scenario is different, every discussion is different, and every consideration is different down to the payment of the cryptocurrency. One of the things that is very interesting to me when I walk into a boardroom or I walk into a walk, or usually I'm not walking, but we're on Zoom talking about, are we going to pay this ransom because we can't migrate to the backup, or they've got all our data and they're putting it on their public shaming website. If you can't migrate to your backup, the facts are such that you may consider paying. You may. If your data is so critical that you can't do business, you may consider paying the ransom so that you can continue business. It's that simple. What's interesting to me is always, except for companies that I've gone through ransomware tabletop exercises with, always I get we'll never pay. We'll never pay. These are criminals. We'll never pay. And then you start going through the pros and cons. You start going through the business considerations. And these are the things that are really important for you to do during a tabletop exercise, because the facts mitigate whether or not you will consider paying, not the bright line of these are criminals, we're never going to pay. So the first thing is, if you can't migrate to your backup and you have no data, and the negotiator has, what usually happens is, I am one, again, this is just me. Others will have different thoughts on this. But 100% of the ransomware incidents that I've been involved in the last 5 years included data exfiltration before deployment of ransomware. That means they have your HR data, your finance data, your customer data. They have the data that you don't want them to have. So to diminish the threat that they will publish that data, at least starting to talk to the threat actor is something that should be considered. If you're never going to pay, even if all your data is put up on a public website that is, that you can search on Google, if that's your position, then you don't need to reach out to the threat actor. But if you're concerned about all of your HR and customer data, including all their social security numbers being up on a publicly searchable website, in most instances, companies will reach out and say, do you prove that you have the data? So at the very minimum, you can continue migrating to your backup, but at the same time, find out exactly what the threat actor has. In some instances, when the threat actor cannot prove they have your data, then companies might say, I'm not paying. I'm not paying unless you can prove you actually have my data. It's probably still a reportable data breach, but at least it's not going to be publicly searchable on a public website. So if they can't prove that they have your data, you might consider, migrate, send out the notification letters and move on. If they have your data, the negotiator will be able to get what's called a proof of life. It's just like a, ransom kidnapping of a real person. Proof of life, proof of your data and that they have it. They will literally send you a file tree that it's a copy, not the whole thing, but a copy of the files and not the files. They'll send you evidence of the names of the files that they have. And then as you migrate to your backup, some people can do it instantly. They're like, yep, that's our data. Some people have to wait until they get their data, their backups. You can see that they actually have your data, and you can determine what the risk is in that data. And usually the risk is such that it is the most important data. It could be your IP as well. And they will threaten to sell your intellectual property to your competitors. So depending on the data will also have an impact on the conversation, your internal conversation on whether or not you pay or not to pay. If the benefits of payment, and again, I even hate saying that because it's so awful when you pay, but the benefit is that your data is not exposed. Now, people always say, but Lynn, they're criminals. How do you know that they're not going to expose it if you pay them? Well, think about it. In my experience, I've never had a company pay where their data was exposed. I've had situations where they haven't paid and their data was exposed, and then they decided to pay, and then they take the data down. Think about the business plan. This is a business. Yeah, they're criminals, but it's a business. If they took payments from companies and then continued to expose the data, no one would ever pay. But because I don't know, I think Kansas Heart Hospital was the only one, and that's the only one to my knowledge where they came back and hit the company, but they didn't expose the data. Think about their business plan. It wouldn't work. So when you pay, your data is not publicly accessible. And when they put your data on a shame site, they send a press release to major media. And so if your data is on one of these sites, all the major media outlets know, and they publish it. And that's why you'll see stuff published and then taken down. So one thing is to keep the incident, a little more discreet. It'll come out probably because it's going to be, it's going to be public anyway. Can you go back to that other slide real quick? I know I'm spending too much time on it, but
yeah, okay.
The other
We're
thing,
getting close to time.
I know. I'm going to just run through this real quick. The other thing is that when your data is publicly exposed, you will have a higher risk of litigation and you will have a higher risk of enforcement actions because the data was publicly available. And when you do pay, you get a certificate of destruction, which is worth the paper that it's on. The downside is it contributes to the problem. It continues to overall higher ransom payments, and it may create a legal exposure for the organization. Okay. I just wanted to get through that. Don't always engage a professional negotiator. You cannot do this on your own. Reported to the FBI. They're actually very good at aggregating data and actually potentially getting the guys down the road. And just make sure that you're not doing this on your own. Okay. There are legal and regulatory risks, and that is OFAC. If you provide a ransom payment to someone on the OFAC list, you could have an OFAC enforcement action. There's also regulatory enforcement. There are different states that are coming up with laws prohibiting the payment of ransom. But the other thing that has been coming from whether you pay or not to pay, to be honest, is it's probably a reportable data breach. There's probably an enforcement action, and there's probably class action litigation, way more than ever before. Okay.
Yeah. So not to rush, but the last topic we want to get to, there are many ways that companies manage their risk. And one of these risk methods is transferring that risk via insurance, as most corporations use insurance in some places. Can you talk about the purchasing cyber insurance to help cover these ransomware risks?
Yeah. So cyber insurance is pretty risky. I mean, tricky. And so make sure that your broker is well versed in cyber insurance and getting the right insurance for you. And that your broker is sitting down with you and talking about the risks. So one of the things that's important is to ask about social engineering coverage. Another is to ask about if you have a HIPAA self-funded health plan, do you have HIPAA coverage? Do you have basic breach coverage, and how much? Will they pay the ransom? The insurance is changing rapidly right now. They got hammered by ransom attacks. You might need pre-approval. That happens all the time, where you have to get pre-approval for the ransom payment. You might have to pay that payment up front, and then you get reimbursed. Do you have the money for that? So coverage is really tricky. Make sure your broker knows this space very well and can help you figure out your risks. If you're doing a lot of marketing is getting companies in trouble with the use of tracking technology on websites. Do you have coverage for that litigation? Do you have coverage for TCPA? Do you have coverage for ADA on your website? So be thinking about your websites too. Applications are increasingly detailed. It's interesting. I've been on more and more calls with clients saying, here's our application. What do we need to do for this? What do we need to do for that? A lot of your IT, there's going to be very specific questions on your data security, your policies and procedures. They're getting very detailed. The good thing about that is it gets you to up your game on security and get more protection. And many companies now, because of the cost of cyber insurance, are looking at self-insurance for this particular risk and self-insuring this risk, because insurance companies are changing how they view ransom payments in particular. So, those are all it's tricky. It's not just like a CGL. Make sure you have the right broker and that you're thinking about the risks that you need to
mitigate.
Mitigate. Thank you.
The cybersecurity insurance industry has changed so much over the last decade. It used to be these applications were like perfunctory things that folks would go through, and now they're very detailed, as you mentioned. And if you answer an incorrect question, I mean, if you give an incorrect answer to a question, it could invalidate your insurance, and
Exactly.
you could wind up, I'm going to use a simple example. If they ask for multi-factor authentication, you say yes, and it turns out that you didn't use it on all of your applications, and that's how the breach happened, then they have a reason, and they're using those reasons to deny claims. So you don't want to wind up in that kind of situation. Do not exaggerate application. Make sure your cybersecurity folks, whether they're internal or external, are helping you answer those questionnaires so that those applications.
Yeah, it's super important because you could waive they could deny coverage if you are fibbing on your application. So make sure that you're looking at that very closely. You want to get to some questions?
Yes, exactly. So we have 3 questions in here. If there's anybody else, now's the time. We're going to try to end right on time. So first question here from Jack. Do statistics show that user training for phishing or malware, et cetera, results in reduction of ransomware attacks?
So I don't know about the statistics, but I'll tell you that in my experience, the more educated your user base is, the better, right? So it's kind of it's a no-brainer almost that you're going to have less attacks if you've got better educated users.
Yeah.
And I would say that that user education is extremely important in this context. People need to know the ways that they're getting in, the vectors that they're getting in, and how important they are to be part of the team for data security, and also how important it is for them to notify their IT professionals when an email slips through. So I would say that I don't know what the actual statistics are, but I would venture to say that the statistics are that absolutely there's a
correlation.
Yeah.
There's a definite correlation. We see the same thing. We use cybersecurity awareness training and phishing testing to work with our clients, and over the course of just a few months, in the course of a year, you can see in people becoming better at recognizing, like you mentioned, sometimes it's one letter off on the URL or the domain names, and being able to just hover over certain areas before you click on anything, and even more importantly, taking a minute to send a suspicious one to somebody that knows. I mean, we're not making everybody experts, but we're making them more proficient at identifying it. And we see that with the training, with the testing, and then the follow-up on, hey, you missed this one here, so maybe a little more a little more training helps out there.
Yeah, I think testing and training is so important, because it really, especially when people fail and you go back and you say, these are all the things that you missed in this one. It's like everything else. They're more attuned to it, and they'll be better educated about what all the threat actors are doing out there.
And it's one of the least expensive parts of what we do, really,
Yeah, for
frankly.
sure.
I mean, it really doesn't take a lot of expense for that.
I find I did some employee training this morning, and I find that people are fascinated when you start talking about QR codes, and you start talking about AI, and the use of your phone, and smishing and vishing. People are really engaged, I think, and care. If you say, hey, you're part of this team, they care. They don't want to be the one who clicks on that,
Yeah. So with advancements in technology, we hear, you can't go a day without hearing about AI. A lot of people are not aware of what quantum computing is yet, but between AI, quantum computing, the dynamics of a lot of this are changing, and they're going to change drastically as we move into the future. But
I just think ransomware is here to stay, and it's, it started with phishing, then they did,
Did we lose you?
and grab data and hold. They know it's valuable and hold it. They're gonna figure that out.
Yeah, some of these tools are making it even more difficult for the average person to not be vulnerable to the social engineering attacks, when AI can just help these threat actors. So you have to be even more and more vigilant as time goes on. about protecting your assets. I think we've already kind of answered these last couple of questions here. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So let me close. Lynn, really, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and walking us through ransomware. I'm sure this was very beneficial. It was for me, for all of our attendees. The presentation slides are available. You can just email me at joe.devine@axiotrope.com. I can put that in the chat too. I can get those slides to you. And we also, let's just click over here. We want to thank our sponsors one more time. And I will add let me see in the chat here. I'll add my email here. So if you want those slides, please email me back here. We'll keep this open for just another minute or two, but thank you so much, Lynn. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks,
Everybody
everybody.
came.
Be safe.
Right. Take care.